Hi, this is Tami Lysher, host of Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. The podcast is focused on fitness enthusiasts and movement educators, where we'll have deep conversations that are impacting the movement industry. For example, trauma, health, vitality, the nervous system, and movement. And now, welcome to the podcast. Good afternoon. Welcome to Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. And I'm Tami Lysher. And today my guest is June Hall, who is also a trauma expert. And we are going to just have a wonderful conversation around some things that are happening with me and with her. So welcome, June.
Thank you. I'm super excited about talking about how you have gotten to where you are and letting people know the unique way that you approach supporting children um, in integrating the experiences that they have through movement. And so I thought a good spot would be talking about how professionally you've arrived here, from being an educator, a Pilates instructor, doing trauma stuff. How did you land here?
Okay. That's actually a really good question. And I think you're probably the first person that's really truly asked me in that capacity. So for the past, I'm just going to say roughly 35 or 40 years, I've been intertwined in the field of early childhood education. And in 2020, I stepped back. I had priorly opened a Pilates studio, and so I was working with adults primarily during that phase. And also during that time, I wrote a curriculum called Trauma Informed Movement, and that was geared more towards adults. But the bottom line is all of the work that I did with children prior to that, most of my time that I had, that's probably more than 20 years, I was working with children that had been impacted by trauma, um, in a lot of different areas, predominantly through poverty.
Mhm.
Um, and even I worked at the height of in Flint, Michigan during their water crisis, and I saw a lot of things happen with children in their development, or their lack of development, I should say.
Mhm.
So, kind of fast forward, I um, I've always had an interest in children that never ever went away. And in the fall of this year, so we're talking 2024, things just kind of started falling into place for me. And I was like, I went and I did a parent child event, and there was over 600 parents and children, and it was geared for, when I say movement, I'm talking like yoga. I did a kind of a combination of yoga and Pilates movements with young children. And it was during that time that, and for a while, I had been thinking about how can I segue, or how can I bring everything that I've done for the past 40 years together.
Mhm.
And it was having this little girl sit on my lap. And that was really what sparked it. She didn't even know what she was doing. She was teeny tiny. She was like 9 months old. And it's from there, it's just evolved into now I'm working privately with children. I'm working with the school district, and I'm also working um, extensively with a nonprofit in North Carolina. So that's kind of how it's pulled it all together. So I'm bringing all of my experiences through the nervous system. So all the work that I'm doing right now is based out of movement, breath work, and the nervous system. So it's all segued together. And we can all have our moments when I'm just going to say, um, our nervous systems can become dysregulated, or we are in that fight, flight, or freeze. And so it's beginning to look at, and how does it look different for children versus adults?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm thinking about, so you have 40 years of looking at children, right? Like their social, emotional, cognitive, physical development. And then you have, a couple decades of teaching Pilates.
Yes.
And, I'm thinking about you also teach Pilates at a college level.
Yeah, I do.
You're a college instructor for Pilates, and these are students who, um, they went through COVID at an important piece of development. And so you're seeing the impacts of individual trauma, family trauma, community trauma from, the water crisis that happened in Flint, and also global trauma. And so you are really supporting people who've experienced so many levels of trauma. And so I'm curious, how do you, when you are approaching somebody and thinking about Pilates or movement, because I know you're a movement expert, not just Pilates, how do you think about movement in relationship to trauma?
Trauma stifles our voice, choice, and agency. And a lot of times things can be, depending on where trauma has happened, it can impact people's motor development.
Mhm.
When I say motor, I'm talking like gross motor, like walking, crawl, like let's just say from scooting to crawling to walking to running to jumping, all of those big muscle movements. And then also the fine motor movements and coordination and balance and those kind of things. And that honestly, when we think about our learning, kids don't just learn randomly how to write with the pen by holding their fingers. They're doing things that are integrating from when a baby is born and they develop from like when they're drawn up, and then when they begin to develop, they start moving outward, and usually the fine motor skills in their fingers are the last things to develop. But if something happens and there is a breakdown, so to speak, or a trauma or an event that caused children to, like, I don't want to use the word stop growing, but it impacted their ability to like expand on that growth, because sometimes we all can become stifled, we can become like just what's of us. I mean, we all have, I mean, every single one of us, it affects us so differently. But the traumas that I've seen, both let's just say from the younger children and even into my observations of students that I've had over the past, year and a half. Um, I see it in the way they move their bodies, either lack of coordination, lack of core development, lack of, um, just body awareness. And
Mhm.
that tends to be a pretty common theme with the children that I've worked with, is not a lot of body awareness. So that's spatial awareness. That is, understanding where their body is, space and time, and how they move their body as they're moving. So they can be really, they might be always so in that fight or flight. So they're always moving, and people think that they're, just because they're running and they're moving, but they're
Mhm.
doing it at high rates of speed. And you don't necessarily, sometimes people think that they're moving like they're supposed to be, but then there's a lot of things that are also missing,
Mhm.
like jumping.
Mhm.
They're walking, but can they jump? And
Mhm.
can they jump with 2 feet off the floor? Can they skip? Or can they, or even walk sideways on lines? And so the things that I'm doing is assessing, I do a pre-test with the parents, and then a post-test in the middle. Not, no, pre, middle, and then a post-test. And I just finished with um, like a child, and he was midway point. And the things that he has accomplished in a very short amount of time has been increased focus and ability to sit still longer at school. But I've also given his mom and his dad to do with them at home that
Mhm.
involves large muscle movements at home, versus now he's got really good fine motor skills, but um, to hold a pencil or a crayon, he struggled.
Mhm.
So large motor movements, and it's just really interesting to see how they've expanded. Um, so
Yeah. So you've posted some nice stuff on Instagram that has like little captured images of doing fun things. And so what would it look like if a child came to you? Like, how long do they come for? And what are the activities like? Because I'm assuming, I mean, you said it's a lot of movement. I imagine there's play built in because,
Oh,
you know,
yes,
play is the language and, of children and how they learn.
yes,
So what
yes.
does that look like?
So everything that I do with the children is play-based. Typically, the first session is just building that trust and making the child feel safe with me is really, really important. So I try to find things and tap into things that are of interest to them before I start pulling in things. They may bring, like I'm just going to call it maybe a stuffed animal or a blanket to make
Mhm,
them feel safe at first. But
mhm,
what I really try to like give them things to do, like let's let's hop like rabbits. And so setting up like almost like an obstacle course using a variety of things. I like the kids to go barefoot if possible because our feet have over 7,000 proprioceptors in them. So the nerve endings in our feet are really important. And it allows the kids to move freely without their shoes on, like to be able to, you know, jump, like coming to the balls of their feet and jumping. Um, so it might look like I usually have at least 4 to 5 activities that I improvise, like I provide the materials
mhm.
and they're usually like I've used, and it sounds funny, but or not funny, but hula hoops, balls, BOSUs for those of you that are involved in lots of balancing tools
Mhm,
besides the BOSU. Balance beams, um, painter's tape on the floor, painter's tape on the wall. So the kids, like I've made like designs so the kids can like roll a ball and
Oh,
down,
nice.
up
Uh-huh.
and down, and then just even giving them a ball and having them just squeeze and release. I have lots of different kinds of balls. So giving the kids choices of what we're going to do. And that's a really, really important part for how I approach the children because oftentimes, children are not given control. I don't want to use the word control choices over
Mhm,
what they want. Do you want to do your activity first or do you want to do mine? And
mhm,
then we might do one of mine and then give them the tools that I brought. How can you, like, this is how I did it, but how can you use the same tools and do something a little bit different like with it?
mhm,
Um, I really try to look at and I use that time through observation and assessment of understanding where the kids are developmentally. And so usually children that are by the time they're 5, they should be jumping like at a pretty good level. And when I see children that are older and they're not jumping, those are obviously red flags that come up for me. So, but what I like to do is to try to look at the body in the around like in the area of motor movement. Think about it as full body integration because we're getting both sides of the hemisphere and the brain working, which is going to help with so many different things. Cross body movement is also critical. So
mhm,
using children to their using their bodies in different ways, like holding hands and jumping, or laying on the floor and doing a cross body movement and
mhm.
rolling. And yes, I get on the floor and I do it with the kids.
I was gonna ask. Uh-huh.
I do, I do. Sometimes um, I have the parents get on the floor with me.
Mhm,
I've used hula hoops as a couple of things. Using the hula hoops as boundaries. And then we talk
mm,
about if I do something like pull on that hula hoop, how does it make you feel when I pull on that hula hoop? Oh, I don't like it. And so we giving the kids language around those kinds of things. Um,
mhm,
letting them begin to take risks.
mhm,
And what I mean by that is so oftentimes when sometimes we're intimidated to take risks or
mhm,
we don't feel safe in our own bodies. Um,
mhm,
and it's getting them to the point where they will take, I might take me holding their hand or holding a finger to go across the balance beam because I have a round balance beam. And if you've ever tried walking on a round balance beam,
mhm.
it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, but I use materials that are that I've used for adults as for children, because I have clients, like, let's just say, that are over 50, and their balance. So a lot of the things that I do, I gear it up and down, but there's so much that we can do. I'm even using a ball against the wall and saying, like, he he throws it and I catch it, and then I throw it and then he catches it. So a lot of eye focus and
Mhm.
eye things is really important as well. So,
Mhm.
um, but I have a whole, like, a lot of things that I use with them. And I pull from all of the years of experience of being in classrooms, because my job at one point was to go in and observe children. And if they had a disability, then I would say we need to refer them to
Mhm.
early on, or we may need to refer them to, special education services. But even as far back as I can remember, when I saw children that were not crawling and
Mhm.
they would sit on the floor, and, I if parents don't know, if they don't think or they don't know, um, that's where I come in and say, this is what we can do.
Mhm.
So, and
Oh,
I think, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
go ahead.
I was
So,
just
oh,
I was gonna say too, I had a lady um reach out to me, and she lived in California,
mhm.
and I c- we can do things virtually. I mean,
Mhm.
if I can see through a camera lens, I can help the parents. It would look different than what I do
Mhm.
when they're here with me in the studio, but
Mhm.
there's ideas and things. And I'm actually creating, I'm saying it publicly, it'll happen someday, but I'm actually creating a booklet um, of things that are going to be more parent-child, and I'm going to divide them by um, bodily sensations.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Nice. So you talked about how development starts in the core
Yep.
and, getting some head control and getting some upper body, and then, it continues to move out until you get to the fingers. So is that a framework that you use when you're working with the children? Do you start with, okay, we'll start building the core and then we'll move and then we'll finally hit fine motor?
I
Or how do you make
um
those decisions?
I would say it's full body, because
Mhm,
you can't sit on. I mean, I might do things with the kids where they would be very, sometimes they're called um going back to, like, the primal movements, getting on the floor and actually doing like an army crawl. And we
mm,
don't think about it being for exercise, but in reality, anytime we're doing any of those things, they all truly are. Or in
mhm,
Pilates, like rolling like a ball, or doing any like roll-ups or rollovers. Um, I even doing boat pose and going
mhm,
from boat to teaser. So with
mhm,
support, with support, or saw, or any of those exercises, like the basic Pilates exercises. But then I also pull in, things that are going to be cross body movement, or
mhm,
even like reaching across, like, I'll give you an example of what we did. And I planked with a little boy, and then we did it on the floor, and I had cones, like colored cones, and we put the cones across. So we had to move them from one side to the next and then back over while
while
holding
flaking?
while planking.
That's awesome.
And but again, those are things that I do with adult clients. I just make it fun for the
Mhm,
kids. It's like, for adults, we might use a hand weight to move it from one side to the next. Well, for the kids, I'll give them like bean bags, or I'll give them animals, or I'll give them blocks, or I'll give them something that could be, or even maybe rolling a ball from one side to the next.
mhm,
So it really depends. And I'm very, just like I am in the studio with adults. I mean, I'll come in with the framework, but sometimes it's not always there for the adults, especially if there's been, I don't know. maybe they've had an injury since the last time I saw them. Or maybe a child comes to me and they'll tell me, I'm tired today. Okay. So we
Mm,
might, but that's an opportunity to teach them more about their own nervous system. And I know I don't talk
mhm,
about their nervous system. I talk about it from how does it make your body feel? And sometimes if they don't have the words for it, well, tell me about it. And then through them describing their emotion or how their body is feeling, then maybe we can come up with words that would be like age appropriate for them, but that might be their words, not mine.
mhm,
So if they're angry, what does angry look like?
mhm,
Angry looks red.
mhm,
Or, you know, just when I really like taking those words that I used before, voice, choice, and agency, because sometimes children, if they are maybe they've been bullied at school and so they don't have the voice to
mhm,
stand up for themselves, they might not have the confidence to stand up for themselves. So it's really, I look at movement as it's just full integration. And I mean, there's been studies that have been done around using motor movement or body-based movements to see children and their level of skills or their level of confidence has grows when they can accomplish something. And it might be, one or two times, or it might be, like consistency. And so through the motor movements in finding consistency, so they're continually using it. But I go back to some of that very early childhood infant development, because if they missed a phase in infant development,
mhm.
it shows up later in
Yeah.
other kinds. Like,
Mhm. Yeah. So, how do you see that? I'm just thinking about some little people that I've seen that they hate tummy time. So they never do tummy time and they really don't spend a lot of time crawling. They just like to be up and they like to be scooching along the couch and then walking, but they miss that whole tummy time crawling piece just because it's very aversive to them. So, I'm just thinking of that as like an example of how motor movement might be missed. So,
and
what do you see
that
when people miss it?
when they miss it, usually there's a delay in some other kind, like they might have issues with their balance.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
They might have issues with even coordination, like
Mm-hmm.
doing, I'm gonna just say like standing and doing like crossing and taking their right hand to their left knee and lifting, like just something as simple as that. That's where I get right back down on the floor with them and we do those kinds of things. Or
Mm-hmm.
we might go from scooching on our belly or doing like an army crawl to eventually coming on all hands and knee, like all fours. And then maybe we'll add in extension or spinal balance or bird dog, as some people call it, and doing things that are going to be expanding for them, depending on their age and size. I put them on the reformer, but
Mm-hmm.
it's very basic things. It's fun things. It's like jump board and getting them to do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, understanding, do these kids, some of them need to have heavy work. And the ones
Mm-hmm.
that need the heavy work, where it's the push, the pull.
Mm-hmm.
But what that does is it slows them down and they can feel it in their body.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're always going really, really fast,
Mm-hmm.
try to give them heavier work so that makes them slow down.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just allowing them to like begin to feel emotionally. What does it feel like? Because oftentimes, um, if they don't have the body awareness, they sometimes don't, they lack the emotional words to describe how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I want to just preface this by saying that just because they have a sensory issue doesn't mean that they can't identify what their emotions are. It's overall because the kids that I'm seeing are coming and they might have a diagnosis of ADHD, but sometimes there are underlying other things that are going along with it. So it doesn't matter that I it's I just am looking at it from a different lens because I'm not in the classroom as a school teacher. I was My master's is in early childhood education, but I also taught early childhood education for 17 years at the college level. So
Mhm.
child development and child movement. And so it's been for me, it's been my area has been the gross motor and fine motor movement that I've really honed in on over the last few years. And I mean, that's why I do like even the adult movements. I mean, I think that it's amazing to me when you see like the kids, then they can master those kinds of things. Learning to skip is also something that a lot of times children, those kinds of things are missed. Um, Having the ability to walk side like side by side or walk a pattern.
Mhm.
Hopscotch, hopscotch is an old game. When you have kids that do it, or even I used painter's tape on the floor, and we had two lines. And all I did was we started with our feet in the center between the lines. We jumped, so we were in, and then we jumped our feet out. So it was like if you think about the beginning of like a jumping jack,
Yep.
because to do a jumping jack, usually by the age of 8 or 9, they can accomplish doing those kind of things.
Mhm.
But if they've missed something, that's going to be a really hard because it's coordinated, it's balanced, and it's timed.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
using different, um, again, it's just going back to where they are and where they're at and taking them from the point of what do they need. If they need help with holding a pen, just teaching them how to hold a pen is not going to necessarily strengthen their hands to get them to do it.
Mhm.
Um, Using like things that are going to be holding a pole or holding, I mean, there's a variety of things that we can do, but balls, and depending on how strong they are, I might even use small hand weights with them.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. So, if a child comes to you who has some of these movement issues, or they've had a trauma that's made like them a little bit wonky in their movement and nervous system, how long do kids come to see you for? And is it weekly or every other week? And what's your
So
usual expectation?
right now, I have had, um, I would say to start with, it's every week for a few weeks.
Mhm.
And then what I've seen is when the parents want to make a difference and they are coming and I give them homework to do at home with them. And it's not just for the child. I try to make it inclusive for the whole family,
Mhm. Mhm.
whether it's through breathing or movement. So it's definitely including teaching the kids how to breathe and the parents and
Mhm.
what the parents can do with their own nervous system and how their nervous system helps regulate their child's. And it doesn't matter if they are a newborn or if they are, let's just say 6 or 8, and they're
Mhm.
having meltdowns,
Mhm.
we set the tone for our children. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of times people don't want to hear that, but I feel it's important to say because if we're high strung, more than likely you're going to see those kind of behaviors coming out in their children and
Yeah.
how they handle things. So to answer that, June, I would say it starts off closer together and then and then maybe we might go every other week. And
Mhm.
then, like right now, I'm not going to be seeing any clients at all during, like when I say clients, I'm talking about children and families for
Mhm.
the next 2 weeks. So
Mhm.
that's going to be a break in there. And so giving them ideas of things to do um, for at home and what kinds of things can they do to help them with breath work, with
Yeah.
movement,
Mhm.
um, and having them understand that, you know, calming our bodies down is so important.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and sometimes, I mean, we can reference it as being social emotional, or it can be nervous system based, but all of my training has been through the nervous system and everything that I have seen with myself or with other people. When there's behavior change in yourself with your own nervous system, you begin to see it in other people around you.
Mhm. Mhm. For sure. And I love that you're doing things for the entire family because we as parents cannot expect children to do what we can't do. And so if every time we get a little upset, we lose our minds, we can't expect children to be patient and regulate themselves. Um, we have to be a nice grounding place for children. And so the fact that you are including the entire family is, just beautiful. It changes like everybody's nervous system and the family system so that everybody is more regulated. And that makes a huge difference in children's capacity to process emotions and for families to be able to manage hard things that happen. Because, I mean, the reality is families experience lots of hard things, right? On the regular. And so the more skills and capacities they have, the better.
Yeah. And I think that, um, I can tell you from like when I started, I worked with Chantel Lopez and Ann Bishop. And initially in 2020, I actually wrote a curriculum and it was called Mindful Movement for Children. And Chantel said to me, Timmy, you have to reach I mean, and essentially it's you got to reach the adults first before we're going to reach the children.
Mhm.
And this approach is to allow parents, autonomy in themselves, in their own parenting. And when I can tell you that one of um, my clients that I'm working with, and when she said to me, my parenting has changed, and she said, because I asked her to look at her child with eyes through curiosity.
Mhm.
If he can't communicate or she can't communicate, how do you think that makes them feel? So
Yeah.
looking at it through with curiosity of, I wonder.
Yeah.
So
And oftentimes parents are willing to do things for their children that they don't do for themselves.
yeah,
So they say, oh, my child needs to learn how to have regulated breathing. I'm going to practice with them, where they for themselves might do it because they've just got so many time demands and so many pressures. So, I think you can change the family through the parent, but also the many things that parents are willing to do for the benefit of their children.
yeah. And I've also heard parents say, I want to things do different things, do it things differently than when I was raised.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's really it's it's just, and I feel like I'm just at the tip of the iceberg with the work that I'm doing right now, because I mean, even though I've been doing it for a long time, this is the first time that I've given birth to it on on social media, um, and even like just branching out and saying this is what I'm doing and incorporating and using yoga and Pilates. And I've been trained in children's yoga, and Pilates to me is just, you know, I've done a lot with it. And I think that it's just adapting it to what the child needs.
Mm,
And I do that for clients that come to see me in person.
yeah,
I'm adapting it to what their needs are.
yeah,
So, June, thank you so much for this conversation. This has
yeah.
been a delight. So,
Lovely
so,
to hear all the things you're doing.
oh, thank you. So,
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. It's my lifelong mission to educate and bring awareness to the fitness industry around trauma-informed movement. If you have any questions or subject that you would like to hear addressed, reach out to me at my website at www.studiotpilates.com. Hit that subscribe button so the next time we release our latest episode, you're going to be notified. You can also reach out to me on Facebook at Tami Lysher. On Instagram, you can also reach out to me at Tami Lysher, but also Studio T Pilates MI. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and we'll talk to you next time.